Hare Krishna. So we'll start with an auspicious kirtan here in Burlington. Kelly will lead, and hopefully you can hear it through this mic camera setup.
We get positions. We're arriving. So come into a comfortable seat. Just find any movement. Release your head, your neck, your jaw. Shimmy your shoulders. Anything you're carrying from your day up until this point. We arrive here together. The ground we center and we open our mind, our hearts to this sacred wisdom, Shastra of the Bhagavad Gita in Samdha community. Take a deep breath in through your nose, fill up. Open your mouth, exhale, let it go. Opening prayer, this invocation, honoring of all of our teachers, all the acharyas. Walk this path of yoga before us, bestowing the light of knowledge upon us, removing the darkness of ignorance. We honor all spiritual teachers of all spiritual paths, of all spiritual lineages. Deep breath in.
Haribol. Best way to start anything, in my opinion. And in the opinion of Bhagavad Gita, actually. Chapter 9 will substantiate that. Hare Krishna. Great to be with all of you always, and especially today with so many people in person. It's really my privilege. That's my favorite kind of class. I mean, with the way the world is, we do Zoom, we do online, and as much as possible, that's terrific. And also there's a lot of value in just being around devotees and hearing right from their mouth. And either way, it's the process of association, something I'm really grateful for in this moment. So thank you, everybody. So yeah, as I like to do, we'll start with just kind of going over what we talked about last week, where we were in the Bhagavad Gita. We had a number of really interesting questions and comments and reflections in the chat. I think I even missed maybe one, maybe Kira's. I think that I didn't answer yours, but we can also just after class or on WhatsApp. And if there's any other questions or comments, we can start with that, so we can kind of go over what we talked about. From pretty much the point of Arjuna's surrendering, is really recognizing that, okay, I need help. In 2.7, accepting Krishna as a teacher. And then we talked about the principle of the guru, the shift that happens, fundamental shift that happens when we actually view ourselves as students and are ready to learn. And there's that surrender, a personal surrender, that is happening between Arjuna and his friend Krishna, the Supreme, and is also happening in the lives of spiritualists when they seek guidance, and also seek guidance from within, from the presence of the divine within their heart. And we talked about the reciprocity of Krishna, of the divine, how that actually is his fundamental nature. He's waiting for us to make a move. He's waiting for us to be ready to receive. And that bhakti is really the science of receptivity. It's the art of becoming receptive to descending wisdom and guidance. So that was there. We also talked about, well, rather than talk at you, why don't we take reflections on anything that stood out? And then I could fill any gaps that are there. Anything that you remember from last week, either the class or your own readings. We read to the end of the chapter 2, or anything that came out in the WhatsApp chat, any reflections that are there. This is the time. Yeah, they can hear. I think you guys have confirmed you can hear. Yeah, they're good. Kelly, do you remember any reflections or anything that stood out for you?
One of the latter things that you were talking about in the class was about how developing higher taste. And that's really how we can get beyond the distractions of the mind.
Right.
It's through developing a higher taste.
Just in case you all can't hear there, I'll just repeat. Kelly was saying that towards the end of the second chapter, Krishna talks about being detached from the objects of the senses, and that fundamentally the most practical way of doing that is getting the higher taste. 259 talks about that higher taste, the spiritual taste of bhakti, of service. And that's the way to get free from the dualities, because it's described in the yoga text that the mind has 2 functions and 2 functions only. It's accepting and rejecting. I want this, I don't want that. I like this, I don't like that. Seeking pleasure and avoiding pain. And so it's always in that back and forth. And so it's never like you can never really on the material level sit still. Just like I'm pretty comfortable in this chair right now, but I guarantee you after enough time I'm going to need to move around. My mind is going to say, like, you need to uncross your legs and find a different way to sit. Otherwise, I'm going to freak out on you. And it doesn't matter how comfortable it was. It's never going to stay like that forever. So there's that duality. And it's not just a mental exercise to, like, grit your teeth and, like, power through that. That's not going to help you. That's not actually going to help you become detached from the comings and goings, as well as the practice of bhakti and developing that higher taste. Mentions that. Great reflection. Anything else that stood out from the last week? We talked about reincarnation. That was there. A lot about how the body and the self are different. That was a really big theme, right? That there was all these analogies, just like you're wearing clothes and they wear out. It's like I actually had a different shirt on, but I had dinner and it got a little stain on it and some turmeric there. I was like, oh, that's gonna come out, but I gotta scrub at it, and I'm not gonna wear it because it's gonna have like this big wet mark on it. So I had to set it aside. And so the body gets to a point where you have to set it aside. Krishna uses this analogy, so we're just borrowing it, that when your clothes run out, you get the spiritual TJ Maxx refresh, get a new body, because it's a vehicle. And so that was there, and that had a lot of relevance for Arjuna, because he's in this moment where he's like, I can't do this. I can't end people's lives. It's the end of them. And Krishna's like, no, it's not. It's not the end of them. It's not the end of you. It's not their beginning either. They're passing through, and so are you. So a lot of the chapter, especially the first half, dealt with that. Yeah. Any other reflections?
From
Yeah.
71, 271.
Verse 271. Yeah.
About desirelessness.
Hmm.
I think that was something that really opened my eyes to how I define desire, and to understand that Krishna consciousness is a basic principle of real peace, is the end of the purport there. I think that that's something that I've seen come up in life of, you're always chasing the next thing. You like that desires met, and then you go find something else to desire.
Hmm.
And so to hear about desirelessness as a form of desire for Krishna, that was like, my mind was just rolling on that.
Nice. I'm just going to check at this point. Could you guys hear that reflection? Because I can repeat it back. You're able to hear it. Great. Perfect. So yeah, so that really leads into, and you can see it's at the end of the second chapter, that really leads into what the third chapter is about. Because Arjuna actually has this confusion. This is a very, very practical and relevant point of confusion, because this happens a lot for people. As show of hands, anybody ever had this question or doubt, like, how can I, because it seems to me like if I'm going to be spiritual, I have to just like, get off the grid, check out of the whole, rat race, like go like to a mountain or something, go to a cave, I don't know, do some kind of really drastic thing like that, shave my head, live in an ashram, get the address of where Shamya used to live when he was a monk, and do that or something, right? And like, or I'm in the world and I'm like just completely overwhelmed. It's like one or the other. How does that work? Anybody ever had that doubt or have lack of clarity around that? Like, everyone in the room is raising their hands. Everyone online is nodding and raising their hand. Yeah, it's a really common thing to think like that. And Arjuna starts the third chapter with that very same question. There's an apparent contradiction. Apparent contradiction, not actually contradiction.
That was sort of like part of your question, right, in the chat, wasn't it? You were mentioning, Kira, a little bit about.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
exactly like that. Sort of, you can come to this place of peace and understanding, and then also like the next day I have to go to work, and you're
Exactly.
back materialistic.
Yeah.
I shared a little bit with Kelly, like my own process of coming into the Bhagavad Gita was really like, I work in the human trafficking field. I think I mentioned that last week. And so, you find this peaceful place and like, okay, I can do this work and I'm guided divinely. And then I go to work and I'm like, I can't do it.
Yeah.
Like that sort of, and just coming to that place of like, how do you live both knowing that you also have to pay bills and show up
Absolutely.
in certain ways.
Yeah. And yeah, please.
Yeah, I think like leading into the third chapter, feeling that like, what do I have, what else do I have to do? Where else do I have to cleanse to get to this place of like peaceful knowing? I don't want to sound ignorant too, but for me, in a certain time, a few years ago, for me in the human trafficking field, I was left in a place of like, all I had was divinity and God. That I literally was like on my knees for help.
Yeah.
Like, how am I to do this work? I know that I was meant to do something certain, and my conscious self didn't want to agree with that. But my higher self was like, you've got to do this one thing. And I was like, no. And so there was like this argument. That's why I identify, I think, so much with this.
Arjuna,
Is that that I had that argument myself. I don't want to do this. I don't want this to be my mission.
Mhm.
And it was anyway. Like it had to be. That's what I was here for. That's what I was meant to do. But that sort of conflict of, but I don't want to. I kind of like material world and not having to deal with this other stuff. So
yeah, this is exactly what Arjuna is going through.
Yeah.
And he mentions in the second chapter that he'd like to check out and not have to pay those bills.
yeah,
He's like, I can't afford the cost emotionally and socially for what my job and my duty, my dharma, what I'm good at, what I like to do, what I've been trained to do, my place in society, what that's asking me to do. I can't write that check.
well, even his fight with the people, like I have to fight my own people, and
Yeah.
that's for me. It was like fighting my own people
Yeah.
to say like this, we're gonna hide this, we're gonna do these things that. That conflict, and I think that arises, and just using my personal experience, I think that arises in many different ways of like that discontent of like, I don't agree with this, but we have to for certain reasons in our materialistic world, or
So how to reconcile.
how to reconcile.
And that's what the third chapter is all about. So yeah, let's look at that 71st verse. Krishna says, a person who has given up all desires for sense gratification, who lives free from desires, and who's given up all sense of proprietorship and is devoid of false ego, they alone can attain real peace. And that would seem to indicate like not doing anything. That's how Arjuna sees it. And so going to the third chapter, he leads with this. He says, okay, so, O Krishna, O Keshava. First verse, I'll just share the screen on this one. This is the first verse of the third chapter. Arjuna said, O Janardana, another name for Krishna, O Keshava. Why do you want to engage me in this ghastly warfare if you think that intelligence is better than fruit of work? Fruit of work means acting for some result. If you're telling me, Krishna, that I should be recognizing that I'm not the body and people aren't their body, why are you asking me to pick up a bow and arrow and do such, brutal activity? Those don't. There seems to be a contradiction. And so he says, next verse. My intelligence is bewildered by your equivocal instructions. Tell me which is the most beneficial for me, acting or not acting.
Mhm.
He's seen them as in opposition to each other. Either I don't act and I'm detached and I have spiritual knowledge and I'm in that, as you put, that calm place of knowing, or I act and I'm like swept away and there's so much karma in that, there's so much suffering. How can those be the same thing? Or what are you asking me to do here exactly? So Krishna answers. He says that some people are trying to understand their self, the supreme self, through cultivating knowledge. And others try to act in service. And this whole chapter here, he's basically stressing the importance of acting in service. That if you act in a mode of service, that spiritual knowledge is a byproduct. That peace is also a byproduct, which we're seeking. That was one of the motivations Arjuna had. He, to put it mildly, was not having a good day. He was not in a peaceful place. He had a case of the Mondays, big time. And so, we have a certain need to have a peaceful life. We're not here to just be comfortable, but our spiritual nature, good news, is that we're actually beyond comfortable. We're actually fully integrated, joyful, all-knowing, present, adaptable beings. And that was not Arjuna's experience. That wasn't your experience and what you're describing. That's not our experience when we're in these states of duality. And so I'm bringing this up because Krishna's pointing out that to get to that peace, even just that peace you want, that's a byproduct of acting in service. And that action in service is what the third chapter is about. The title is called Karma Yoga. Karma means the thing, in Sanskrit, karma means the thing you do. And it's also the same word means the thing that comes back because of the thing you do.
Mm.
Just like they say, that's really good karma, whatever, won a lottery or something, or bad karma. It's like a word in English now. And in Sanskrit, it's the same word for what you do and the result that comes back because they're connected. They're connected things. You can't do something in the world and not get a result. So that's the word karma means in the title of the 3rd chapter. And yoga means, of course, to connect. Every chapter in Bhagavad Gita is expressed in terms of some kind of yoga. The yoga of, the first chapter was the yoga of lamentation, yoga of suffering, yoga of despair. How does Arjuna's despair and tribulation create connection? So here, this chapter is about how can my work be connection, really? And that's one of the most practical, universal questions people always have about spiritual life. How can I be spiritual at work? How can I be spiritual when I'm changing diapers? What about when I'm like managing money or with my partner at home? What if I need to like take care of this body? What about the whole eating process? I could use the bathroom. That can't be spiritual. There's all these other things I do. And then there's like, if I'm lucky, I can be spiritual like for a few minutes a day. And Bhagavad Gita isn't about, although it can be, but it's not aiming at just having like a spiritual experience for a few minutes a day. It's offering a lifestyle that is fully integrated, including work, including family. And at any given time, most people are going to be doing those things. They're not going to be monks. There are some people who stay monks their whole lives. I know a few of them. I was one of them for a few years. And like most of them, I also came back to the rest of the world or real world or what have you. So Krishna's instructions in Bhagavad Gita are practical. And by the way, Arjuna was married. He had children. He had a job. We're here on his job site right now. And he had family, he had concerns. He had social responsibility. He was very concerned about the widows and orphans that were going to happen. Like he's just in the world, So Krishna is saying in the 4th text, not by merely abstaining from work can you obtain freedom from reaction. He's saying, excuse me, I'm so excited for Bhagavad Gita. He's saying that just choosing not to do anything isn't itself going to free you from the reactions of your work. And one way to understand that is that choosing not to do anything is also a choice. You can't, because part of what happens for the soul in the face of these difficult moments is that having agency becomes a burden. It seems like, I would rather like be a non-entity here. I would rather no one have to look to me to make a decision, because what if I make the wrong decision? What about the results here? Like, better I just wear like the sofa over there. I could just like chill and let someone else take over. And so that's a choice. If one wants to check out, given to like distraction or avoidance strategies, you can do that. And it's a classic thing to do because choosing is hard and making decisions is hard. But that's also a choice, and there's also a reaction. If you're observing something unjust happen and you're like, not my problem, it's too awkward. I'm a police officer and that's my brother committing a crime. I can't deal with this. I can't imagine the conversation at the dinner table later. Mom's gonna be so annoyed if I have to arrest him. It's just like, didn't see it. That's a choice. You might lose your job. Definitely you're creating a situation for the person who's suffering a crime at the hands of your brother. That's kind of what Arjuna is dealing with. Now in the 5th verse, very, very important point here. I'll share this verse 2. This is a very relevant way to understand how you basically have to act. He says, everyone is forced to act helplessly according to the qualities they've acquired from the modes of material nature. Therefore, no one can refrain from doing something, not even for a moment. And so, like any parents in the room will understand this. If you observe your children from the time they're very, very young, they have personality. You can have identical twins. And according to biology, identical twins have the same genetic structure as each other. And they have unique personalities. They have their own trajectory that they've come into this life with, their own momentum, their own direction and speed. And, like when I was a kid, if you left me alone, you'd find me with a book. Like I would find the book in the room and I would just be like looking at it. Like I would read dictionaries for fun. No joke. That was my idea of a good time. Those are the qualities I'd acquired somehow or other, before this life, that I just love knowledge. Helplessly, it's described. Like you couldn't tell me not to read. It wouldn't happen. I would just sneak away and do it forbidden if I had to. And other people have their nature. Some people, like you watch the kids, some kids will they'll create games and they'll like organize their friends, and they'll have like a kind of like controlling social people thing going on. And some will deal with like the natural world, and they're very like hands-on, and they're touching things and making things. And, you know, some are like very artistic and or musical. And so Arjuna has his nature too. And so Krishna is saying, listen, you can't back away from your nature. And I'm not asking you to back away from your nature here, because actually everyone is already doing something all the time anyway. You can't really press pause on being a person. As long as you're in the world, you have these qualities, whatever they may happen to be. So the path of Bhagavad Gita isn't the path of denying that you have tendencies, denying you have likes and dislikes, denying you have preferences and skills and motivations. That's not exactly what it's about. Although at the perfectional stage, one may be observed to have, you know, no attachment to this world. But to get there, you actually are asked to use your activities, use your preferences, use it and purify it. That's what this chapter is about. And so Krishna elaborates on this whole thing of like, you're going to act anyway. In the 6th verse, he says that one who restrains their senses of action from an activity, but their mind is always thinking about it, they're a pretender. Like, it, you know, you can put on a good show, right? You can be like telling everybody in the world that you've conquered the tongue, and you don't think about food anymore. You don't eat anymore. You don't like get up in the middle of the night and like splurge on a gallon of ice cream. But if you're sitting there after fasting for a couple of days and you're thinking of like, oh man, I really could use a samosa. No one knows it but you and God in your heart. But you haven't actually achieved the results of being truly detached from samosas or food if you're actually thinking about it, because that's just what's happening internally. It will act externally at some point. It must. Whatever's occurring at the subtle level will occur at the gross level. You know, everything moves from subtle to gross. You have a desire, you think about things, your intelligence starts to plan around it, you organize your life around that. Next thing you know, you're going to the store and buying a samosa. You know, that's what we're doing all the time. And so Krishna is saying, don't worry so much about not doing externally, because that's not going to shut off what's happening up here for you. You're more subtle than these senses, you know. You could lose the capacity to even have hands. You could have someone have to feed you, and you'll still be thinking about food. You'll still want it. It's not so external. You're a very internal, you're a very subtle being. Focus on the internals. So how to do that? Verse 7. If a sincere person tries to control their active senses by the mind and begins karma yoga, the practice of connecting through activity, without attachment, they're superior to the person who's trying to do nothing, trying to be avoiding everything in the world. And this is in verse 8, do your prescribed duty, that which you're meant to do in society, because you can't even maintain your own body without work, right? This is relevant. You want to like be a spiritual person, but you got to put food in your belly. You got to like, even as a monk, you got to get a certain amount of sleep. There's only so many corners you can cut. You're in a body, you have certain things you got to do. The way this culture is now, you pretty much have to have a credit card, I think, to function in society. I think I've seen homeless people with cell phones, even they have to have cell phones to pretty much function. There's a certain threshold of like what you need to work in the world at all, you know. Even if you lived in a mountain, you didn't have any of those things, you still have to sleep and eat. So Krishna's like bottom lining it for us. You're going to have to do something anyway. So what do? Text 9. Classic verse, one of the really central verses. This chapter. Yajnatat karmanon yatra loko yang karma bantanaha taratan karma kaunteya mukta sangha samachara. Work done as a sacrifice for Vishnu has to be performed. Vishnu is the name for the Supreme. He's the all-pervasive, universal Lord. Work done as a sacrifice has to be performed. Otherwise, work causes bondage. Work causes bondage in this material world. Therefore, O son of Kunti, that's Arjuna, perform your prescribed duties for his satisfaction, and in that way you will always remain free from bondage. And the purport Prabhupada says, any other work done in this material world will be a cause of bondage, for both good and evil work have their reactions, and any reaction binds the performer. This is a very deep concept. What does this mean? It means that Arjuna was really happy to do his job when it felt comfortable. If you could imagine taking down the bad guys and his family being alive and being there to celebrate with him, then he feels great about doing his job. Why? Because he can see himself enjoying that in that position. He can see himself in the middle of that, being the enjoyer and controller of that, and thinking like, yeah, this works for me. And when it was really the opposite outcome, potentially, he was aghast. It was such a terrifying proposition. He just didn't want to do it. So that means that at the level of his heart, he was motivated for his own comfort. He was doing work like most people do most of the time, based on what's good for them, what's in it for me. And the assumption underneath all of that is that I'm in the middle. I'm actually the controller of the activity. I'm the enjoyer of its results. And people don't usually say that to themselves, but it's so fundamental to how we live that it's pretty much unspoken. And Krishna is saying, I'm not telling you don't act. And I'm not even telling you act. I'm saying act in service. Change your motivation. There are higher reasons to do this duty than whether you like it or not. And when you connect to that reason and you perform your duty in that way, then it's not karma, it's karma yoga. And that no longer causes bondage. And so when Prabhupada says the work done outside of this kind of transcendental consciousness creates a result, good or bad, what he means is that, if I live a life where I don't connect anything I do to higher power at all, there's no service at all, I can be very pious and law-abiding and truthful and kind and, like really sweet and fun and honest and all those good qualities. And that's good karma. I'll get like the good results of that. But it's gonna require me to have another material situation to enjoy that. I'm gonna be more attractive or live longer or be in a demigod body or, have different capacity in my next life, be more intelligent, be more whatever, powerful. But I'm still in the material world because I've wanted to be, because I've acted in such a way that I want to be the center, but I'm willing to do it by the rules. I'm willing to be polished. On the other hand, I have an evil brother, let's say. I don't have any brothers, but I have an evil twin brother, and he has the same options and choices as me, and he chooses to live a life of deceit, treachery, guile, law breaking, destruction, and what you name it. And he has got bad karma. And Krishna is saying, I'm not here to tell you to be the good guy and not the bad guy. I'm here to tell you how to transcend both of those things. I'm here how to share with you how you can transcend both of those things. So you're no longer seeking comfort. Thank you. You're no longer seeking a comfortable situation. Has anybody ever had this experience of like, things are going great in your life? You're really hitting the gym, you're getting your exercise routine going, you're waking up on time, you're going to bed on time, you're like in a pretty good flow. And you think to yourself the famous words, if only I could just stay like this forever. Can I just keep this up? Like, I'm good. Let's just do this. Let's just wake up at whatever my waking up time is. And, let's just have things not really change. Let's just have it be like this. Can I just do that? God, higher power, Krishna. Anyone ever had that feeling? I know I have.
And then also like, why doesn't everyone just know to do it like this? They just did this and they would be good to go. It's not that hard.
Yeah. And so
And then the shoe falls.
yeah, then things change up. So built into that is the idea that because I'm comfortable, this is good. This is like how I see myself enjoying. And the reality of the world is nothing ever stays the same. The good times are the bad times. And so Arjuna obviously is going through a very, very challenging situation here. But Krishna is giving him the vision of how to actually act. This third chapter, this section of Bhagavad Gita, is very practical. It's about how to put into practice what to do about the fact that you're not your body. Because Arjuna's like, are you asking me to like just leave everything? Krishna's like, no, I'm asking you to go to war. But I'm asking you to do that in service. Because you're not your body, there's actually a way in which your duty is related to the Supreme. That's going to be fleshed out. Okay, so that was verse 9. So now we get into some practicalities for us. Nobody here, as far as I know, is going and killing, being asked to kill people on the battlefield, but everybody here eats.
I mean, metaphorical.
Metaphorically, yeah, metaphorically, for sure. We're all fighting our battles metaphorically, but Bhagavad Gita is not just metaphorical, it's actually literal too. And so the 10th to 13th, 14th verses are very much about being in the world and how we're being maintained at all times. 10th verse, there is a description of how the source of everything sent forth generations of living beings along with the principle of sacrifice, and saying, be happy with this principle of sacrifice. The Sanskrit word for sacrifice is yagya. Because by the performance of sacrifice, it'll bestow upon you everything you need and want for living happily and getting liberated from the world. And the 13th verse is really practical here. Yagna Shishtashana Santu Muchante Sarvakil Bashaihi Punjate Titvakam Papa Yepa Chantyatmakaranat. The devotees of the Lord, people who practice karma yoga, are released from all kinds of sins because they eat food which is offered first for sacrifice. Others who prepare food for personal sense enjoyment verily eat only sin. So just to clarify, the usage of the word sin here, it's not like a Judeo-Christian context where sin means like you've done bad so you have to suffer. In the context of Bhagavad Gita, Krishna's description here, sin means, the way that Prabhupada's using it, it's that which takes you away from the divine, that which connects you to your material identity, whether that's comfortable or uncomfortable, pious or impious, law-abiding or law-breaking. What's against your fundamental nature? To try to be an independent enjoyer, an independent controller, creates bondage in the world. And if you eat in that way, then your eating becomes a form of bondage to the world. And if you eat the very same foods, often, in a mode of service, then it's actually a kind of yoga. And so that science is alluded to here, and Prabhupada talks about in the purport, because as the section of Bhagavad Gita is talking about, we're being maintained, right? Text 14, all living bodies subsist on food grains which are produced from rains. Rains and the comings and goings of the world are produced and nourished by the performance of sacrifice, actually, like voluntarily as a human choosing to give back. And sacrifice is also relevant to where you are in your life. Like the sacrifice that Arjuna is being asked to make, his duty, what he's good at, is relevant to him because that's what he's made for. That's what he's trained for. That's what he likes to do. Like right now, I'm performing yoga, the yoga of knowledge, because I love books. So I've dedicated myself to reading Bhagavad Gita and understanding that and sharing that, because I could have done that with any book, and I'd be living up to my karma of being a bookworm. But because I'm doing it with Bhagavad Gita, I get benefited, and everybody who hears me gets benefited, and it's not actually a material activity anymore. So, to bring it back to food, because we're living on a planet and we're in these earth suits, and they require biochemical fuel. We actually are living within biomachines. They need biofuel. Now, biofuel comes from the biosphere, which was existing before we showed up in this life, and it's continue to exist, assuming we take care of it. And Krishna's saying, be responsible around that. Recognize that you're integrated in that. And the practical way to do that is through gratitude and through dedication. So the Bhakti Yoga culture includes the culture of dedicating one's eating activities. So, for example, serious devotees in Bhakti Yoga will avoid eating meat. They'll avoid eating fish and eggs because these are kinds of foods that lower the level of the consciousness. They actually bind into the world more. Incidentally, the science around consciousness is also really closely related to the science around health. I actually did a master's degree in public health, and I did an essay or a thesis, like a 90-page thesis, research study on the health benefits of plant-based diets, and I studied all that. Turns out the same diet that's good for your consciousness is also good for your body and mind. So Krishna is nobody's fool. He knew what he was doing, advising that. And besides just eating that way, because pigeons are vegetarians. Are they self-realized souls? I mean, not necessarily. As humans, we have this beautiful capacity to dedicate. And so bhakti yogis, they dedicate their eating process by taking a little bit of the food that they're making. Maybe they'll put it into a separate container. Maybe they'll mentally think about, I'm offering this back up. The way it was demonstrated to me when I was first experiencing bhakti yoga in 2010, I went to vegan cooking classes in Toronto hosted by bhakti yogis. And we learned how to make really, really good food, like vegan sushi and like delicious, amazing things. And then at the end, we put into a little plate, like one of everything. We're looking for sushi, some rice, some vegetables, a drink you made. And we folded our hands and were asked to think about connecting to the Supreme and offering it to them. Just like you would have as a host, you'd have a guest in your home and you'd sit them down and you'd like, yeah, let me take care of you. Imagine someone you really love showing up and you sit them down, you make them the thing that they really want. So every meal is like that. And they would just offer Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Ram, Ram, Hare Hare. And Srila Prabhupada talks about this consciousness. He says, it's just like a child, right? The child is being provided everything, right? Like you may be drawing, maybe coloring. And where do the crayons come from? From the parents, the coloring book, heck, the table that you're like, everything, the chair. And so the only duty that the child has is like, they'll just look up to the parents and be like, thanks. And maybe they'll like draw something for them. I'll give it back to them. Like, I made this for you. That's what we're doing. We're not actually creating anything. It's all been provided for us. But the science of connection through activity is, just to look at it from the food angle, is okay, take what we've been given, avoid unnecessarily karmically binding things that cause negative karma because they're unnecessarily violent, for example. Eat to live, don't live to eat, and give back. Every meal we're always giving back. We're always asking, Krishna, you please receive this. I know it came from you. I got these crayons from you, but at least I tried to color something. Even if I drew outside the lines and it's not very nice, I made it for you. And it's just like any parent, when they receive a doodle from their child, it doesn't matter if it's like Picasso or just squiggles, they treasure it. So Krishna is always going to treasure that reception of that like give and take. So those three verses are about just the eating process.
Can I
Yeah.
challenge you?
Absolutely. That's what we're here for.
So my interpretation of reading on about that was about that phrase too, which was really helpful in a time of rain. Right now is to remember that the rain does bring us food. But my interpretation later of that was that those who do eat meat, then you go through the process of looking at like, where did the meat come from? How did it, from the earth, what did it eat if you're eating? That was my interpretation of like even the exploration of that a little bit later in those verses is, but however, if the meat is consumed, if it's again interpretation, if it's from health or grown with the earth and with the rain and all of that, then it doesn't necessarily pollute the body in the same way if we bought meat from, let's say, Walmart.
Yeah.
So that was just my interpretation. So it was interesting. I sort of leaned in and I was like, oh, this is interesting. I have a different take on it around what the translation is bringing to us, is that no matter what we eat, if we eat with intention, if we eat with that spiritual intention to feed our soul, body, meat suit, however we look at it, then it all works itself out into goodness. So that was just my challenge towards you around that interpretation.
Yeah. In a way, there's not actually like a difference of opinion, because what you're talking about is being conscious and trying to make the best choices we can with what information and whatever level of, activity or attachment we have, like that's there. At the same time, I gave the example of very serious bhakti yogis will avoid meat, fish, and eggs entirely. And not everyone is necessarily there. And that's natural and normal, because otherwise what will be the point of practice? We either like switch a light and we're like perfect, or we're completely on the other side. And so when we're in the process, the practice of developing our consciousness, and let's say some given person is deciding, like, I want to make my eating and cooking and shopping experience more of a yogic thing. I want to make it more conscious. Then what you're talking about is totally relevant. I want to think about, who did I buy this from? Is it local? If I'm still eating meat, if I'm eating meat that's part of my lifestyle, what kind of meat? How much? And what kind of lifestyle did that animal have before it was killed, and so forth. That's very responsible. So I gave the kind of bigger picture thing, and yeah.
Will you explain why it's said that like the highest consciousness, or would be not eating meat? Will you explain?
Sure.
The soul within the
Yeah.
animal?
And so I was just saying that I was giving the long-term view, because it's what Krishna is helping us to aim at. And as we'll see in a few verses, the underlying principle of how to get there is basically this action, this service through action, karma yoga principle that the whole third chapter is about. That if we want to develop, if we want to purify in any realm of our life, including how we eat, or our relationships, or if let's say I have a tendency to, be a little bit short-tempered and I kind of snap at people, I want to purify my tongue and how it talks. The best way across the board, according to this section of Bhagavad Gita, is to engage that same sense in yoga, to develop a sense of service. And so what that looks for any given person will be different, depending where they are. But in terms of the actual logic around why to avoid meat, for example, is that based on the principle that Arjuna he's concerned about his family dying, and Krishna's like, well, there's a soul in the body, and the body and the soul are different. You can't kill the soul. He points out you can't harm it, you can't cut it, you can't burn it. So what's being damaged is you're actually evicting them from their body, which is uncomfortable if you ever experienced eviction. And so the unnecessary eviction of another living entity from their body, when they're at a higher level of consciousness and they suffer more from it, is karmically binding. You're unnecessarily creating suffering. So it's the same principle of trying to minimize your footprint in the world. And so also the consciousness of eating food, what you eat affects how you think and how you feel. That being able to be a peaceful and generous person is related to the kinds of foods we put in our body, because it affects, as the later parts of Bhagavad Gita point out, the science of the modes of nature. The aspects of the material world that affect us are our relationship with them is mediated by things like how we eat or how we sleep. Like if I go to bed really late and I wake up really late, I will have kind of a different relationship with the world than if I go to bed early and wake up early and I'm always there when the sun rises. That second way of living is actually just better for getting more things done. That's why great business people wake up early. Athletes wake up early and train, and spiritualists wake up early and meditate if they can. It's a great time. You get like 80% off, 199% off your efforts at 4 o'clock in the morning for meditating, rather than at 1 o'clock in the afternoon on a busy day. You just get more bang for your buck. And similarly, there's a science to what you put in your body affects your capacity to be acting from your truest heartfelt nature. And so that's underlying the prescription. But the essential point is that our actions matter, and that Arjuna is not being asked to not act. He's being asked to take himself out of the middle and put his service into the middle. How are we doing with the online crew? I feel like we're. Oh, that whole question and answer. I was still paused on the screen, so you can't even see my face. Sorry about that.
Yeah.
How are we doing online? Do you have any questions or comments around what we have so far? It's pretty deep. Don't feel bad.
I'm good. I'm loving tonight. It's great.
Thank you.
Loving it.
You were saying earlier, you said I don't want to appear ignorant. Arjuna didn't worry about appearing ignorant. That's a good quality to ask questions, because chances are if you have a question or a doubt, there's like 5 other people who have the same thing, and they consciously or unconsciously realize, and they don't actually say it. So it's a sign of wisdom to be like, just like Arjuna's like, I don't get it. Help me out. But it sounds like you guys are following so far. Cool. All right, so continuing. Krishna says in the 16th verse, okay, but if you don't follow the cycle of sacrifice, if you live selfishly, then you are basically becoming bound more and more to the world. He puts it this way: living only for the satisfaction of the senses, such a person lives in vain. Why in vain? Because you're never going to satisfy the senses perfectly anyway. So if you try to make that the center of your life, you're doomed to failure. It's never going to happen for you. The body's going to end. Your usually unconscious goal of being the universal enjoyer and controller is going to come to an end. Your little God project is going to have to be put on hold when you die, at the least, and usually earlier. So he's challenging Arjuna's false ego, his sense of himself as what he thinks he is. And he's actually saying, you have a relationship with the divine, with me, and it's related to what you do and how you do it, especially. And then he talks about how when one does their duty, what is required of them in the situation in a mode of service, one finds out what is asked of them specifically in their position of life by the divine. They get acquainted with that science, and they do it in the mode of service. They become perfect in that through practice, and they're no longer attached to any result for themselves. They're selfless and detached, and they have that peaceful place of knowing. Even then, he points out, they tend to still act in the world. Why? Because, verse 20, just for the sake of educating the people in general, you should perform your work. Verse 21, yed acharati shreshtas tat tarevi tarojanaha siyat pramanam kurute lokas tat anuvartate. Whatever action a great man, a great person performs, common people follow, and whatever standards they set by exemplary acts, all the world pursues. That even if someone becomes a purely dedicated person, a spiritualist, they're still advised to act in terms of the world and not just retire to the mountains. Why? Because, for one thing, they can still act in relationship to the Supreme while being in the world, while having children or a job or connecting with other people. And so why do they have to go to the mountains at all? And two, it helps everybody else. Where would we be if Srila Prabhupada decided, no, I'm not going to leave India and the holy place I'm in? He was in Vrindavan, the most holy, sacred place in the world. I've been there; it's magical. And he was actually a Swami. He was in the order of life that actually has full permission to. He never worked at that point in his life. He had given up his working life. He had taken care of his kids, saw to it that his wife and children were taken care of. He had fully been responsible, and he was actually like a fully responsible, renounced person. He could have just not left. And yet, because he did, so many people got to practice spiritual life. It was such a boon and so pleasing to the divine that he did that. So we're not advised to just like check out. Okay, I'm done with you, everybody. You're on your own. And Arjuna similarly is being advised, don't be selfish. You don't have to, it's not just about you. You don't have to leave this situation. The people that
speaks to bravery too, right? Like
yeah.
It's a model of bravery there.
Yeah.
Like when you do this and other people see that bravery, then they too are brave.
Exactly. He gives them permission, and it gives them a guide and a guide and a map on how to actually weather those challenges in life. Imagine if Arjuna goes through this and he sticks it out and he performs it in a mode of service. Now, anybody he ever comes in touch with for the rest of his life who's going through a similar situation, he can mentor them. I get it, because I had to do this thing. Ever heard of Kurukshetra? I was there. I was the head general. Who did I see on the other side? My family, this, that, the other. This is how I got through it. Science of devotional activity in service. So that's the benefit of sticking it out in the world, is that you get to make a big difference for others. And your challenges are not just uncomfortable for you. They become, stepping stones to advancing, but also stepping stones to giving back to others, directly and indirectly. They look at you and be like, wow, they did it, so can I. And maybe even talk about it, Does that make sense? Yeah. Being an example. It's very practical. Bhagavad Gita, as always, is a very integrated text. It's talking about life in an integrated way. be in the world, do your activities in the world, but do them in a way that's not just mindless and selfish. Do it in a way that is service.
I think what's not spoken there is how hard it is to do in the moment of service, right? Even having that act of bravery, there's a compromise of self. I know that it gets to that, but you act in that bravery and so that others can follow, but there's a compromise that happens for yourself in a moment, right? Of like, oh, this is gonna be a lot, like he's having this whole, that's what this whole thing is about. It's like, this is a lot, right?
Yeah.
The bravery then is seen and it passes on, right?
Yeah. And part of the way I would address that is, as we're going throughout Bhagavad Gita, including at this moment in relationship to your question, but throughout, one of the things I like to do is I like to remind everybody that putting in practice all these things in Bhagavad Gita is easier when we have a daily practice, because you don't get to pick when the knock comes at your door and the challenge comes. You don't usually get to pick that moment, it just comes. And so it's about preparation. The life of a bhakti yogi is a life of active preparation also. They're dealing with their life moment to moment and trying to give and be of service, but they're also going inwards and investing in themselves in a deep and meaningful way. And because bhakti yoga is so practical, even if someone's in the world and they're busy and they don't have time to they couldn't do what I did and be in an ashram for 7 years, celibate and simple, like sleep on the floor, they can still reach the same levels of spiritual advancement from a daily practice. That's absolutely viable. That's absolutely there. It's part of the message of Bhagavad Gita. So, it is challenging, and it's easier said than done. It isn't so simple to be like, yeah, it's all about service. I got this. Remembering that and knowing what to do when the challenges come up is actually easy, becomes easier and becomes like nourished and more practical through our daily practice, our sadhana, especially hearing the transcendental vibration of Hare Krishna, chanting it, associating with devotees, offering our food, eating food that's been offered, associating with these really primary, powerful texts like Bhagavad Gita, serving the deity forms, these really fundamental things. They actually make it easier to do that, be like that. And also put you in touch with others who are doing the same thing. Yeah. And then Krishna points out, wow, it's 7:30 already? Oh my God. Having so much fun. Okay, I'll get to text 31, then we'll pause. Then Krishna points out, look, I don't have to do anything. But even I, when I'm in the world, I act in such a way that other people would follow my path. Because if I acted irresponsibly, people say, well, when Krishna was on the planet, he was a big rascal, so I'll just do that. And so the most wise, the most spiritually advanced people will also set an example. And in verse 29, Krishna describes that ignorant people who are bewildered by the modes of material nature fully engage themselves in material activities, and because of that, they become attached. But those who are wise, and they don't do that, they're not attracted to that, they're beyond that, they shouldn't just shake them up and completely unsettle them, even though what they're doing is inferior because of ignorance. You should connect them. You should try to connect them to devotional service. Try to connect what they're doing to advancement. Help them find what they're doing, how what they're doing can be connective to advancing. When I started hanging out with the devotees, they saw that I like to play the guitar, and they'd be like, well, why don't you bring the guitar to kirtan and you can jam with us? And I was all about jamming. So I'd bring my guitar, and I thought I was having a jam session, but I was also hearing Hare Krishna and learning to chant and learning to develop a taste for that. And that higher taste got it to the point where I loved kirtan so much that I was just musical, still very musical, but getting purified by that association with kirtan, with devotees, and so on and so forth. And then 30th verse, therefore, O Arjuna, surrendering all your works unto me, giving all the activities to him, with full knowledge of me, without desires for profit, meaning like you're not doing it and trying to get the results back for yourself, with no claims to proprietorship, you don't own it, and free from lethargy, not doing your duty, actively doing it, fight, because that's the specific thing I'm asking you to do here. Or as you said earlier, fight your metaphorical battle, right? So that's kind of like a summary verse. So I guess I'll say for this week, read verses 1 to 30 and of the 3rd chapter. And then we'll start next week with the purport of 31. The purport of 31 is so practical. It's about how no matter where you are in the world, or where you are in terms of your relationship with these like powerful principles, even if you can see like absolute truth and like, I can't get there, that's so beyond me. If you accept that it's possible for me to get there, that these principles make sense and I'm willing to hear about them and hear about how I can start to practice towards them, that open, non-resentful attitude qualifies you to advance step by step. And that's very encouraging. Hare Krishna. All right. Now we have everyone's favorite time. Questions, reflections, comments, anything that stood out. Let's hear a couple of at least reflections, things that you heard that you'll take away, what this 3rd chapter is about so far for you. You can, if you're online, you can put it in chat. You can raise your hand, we'll call on you, or if you're here in person. Oh, yes. I see you. SK.
Yeah, Shannon.
That's right.
The thing that just resonated with me, and it's not new, but it just sometimes it sinks in differently, is to take yourself out of the middle and put your service in the middle of what you're doing. And I think the more I hear that and apply that in my life, the more I'm getting out of my service and able to be less attached to all of the material things. And that was just something that really resonated with me tonight.
Thank you. Yeah, and if you really look at life and the way it's organized for human beings, if you live a civilized life, you're going to go through a bunch of phases of life and activities that are going to make you service-oriented. Like, I mean, how many people would wake up in the middle of the night over and over again if it weren't for a crying baby? It's like, you don't do that for you. You do it because they need it. And even if you love them and it makes you happy to do it, but that connection, that selflessness, it teaches us how to be selfless. It teaches us how to give. You know, you develop a relationship with your family, with community, and you give. And these like limited spheres of connection, of giving, open us up to our capacity for supreme giving, that actually we can make all of our activities in life a function of our spiritual identity of that I'm a servant. I can give. I can always be giving. I can always be taking care of others and connecting what I'm doing to how does this please the divine? How does this please Krishna? Thank you for that. Yeah, Allison.
I think that so many things stuck out, and I can't believe the way that you relate and give examples are so practical to everyday life. But when you spoke, choosing not to do anything will not free you, really stuck out, because I've run away from a lot of situations and a lot of challenges and dualities, and it doesn't change it. It just, you think you're escaping. So every time you say, I mean, I'm not a warrior, but every time you say running into the woods, I feel like that's just the first thing I would do. And it's just really helpful.
Thank you.
To face the situations and reflect. But thank you so much.
Thank you. Because wherever you go, there you are. You can't not take that with you.
Mhm.
You know, and it's actually, it's so pervasive, this desire to avoid. That's why I would argue our culture does such a good job of providing distractions. We have such a powerful culture of like, and don't get me wrong, like I love, you know, entertainment and recreation too, but we have so many ways to be like entertained, because it's a really natural way to kind of avoid the challenges of our life or our fundamental difficulty in this world, run away from it. Or if you look at more intense things like intoxication and actually like avoiding the problem of being a conscious, sensitive being in the world, and how do I serve in these difficult circumstances? And so it's highly practical what you're saying, that you can't really run from the problems of life. And Arjuna, like in a supreme act of courage, chooses to look upwards and receive guidance in that moment of feeling the rawness of that situation, and gets the wisdom of how to actually do something about it and not have to like put on a mask and pretend he's okay, or like dull his senses, or run away metaphorically or literally, like literally run away from the battlefield and actually go on a mountaintop. So thanks. Anyone else online or in person?
I think the big
Justin, yeah.
takeaway for me in this chapter is when you really start to do things in yajna or in the mode of sacrifice, knowing that the fruits that you do aren't really yours and you offer them every day, that's when you start feeling that big paradigm change in your life. So that verse has always been, when you offer everything back
The results of your
wholeheartedly,
actions.
it's not yours, it never was.
Yeah.
And you can then there's a whole new level of peace and happiness.
Yeah. And you've experienced that. I know
Yes.
personally you've experienced that. So that's coming from a place of like actually practicing this in your life and seeing it.
Right.
It's a kind of thing of like you're being asked to step over the edge of a cliff and be like, who's going to take care of me? Who's going to catch me? Every time you do that, because the conditioned mind's like, I got to eat. I got to get what I want. But if you pause and you're like, well, actually, what I really want to do in my heart is to offer this back first. And I trust that Krishna will take care of me. Then he does. I was, in addition to revealing that I loved music and books, another thing that I've been for my whole life is a foodie. I love to eat. I've always loved to eat. My parents can tell you that. And I have never eaten better in my entire life than when I discovered the science of offering food to Krishna. The eating experience has become so joyful and rich. And I've also been put in touch with the most subtle and refined cooking and eating experiences I could have ever imagined. So in example after example, when we choose to give selflessly or try to be courageous and actually direct our energy to him and say, it's not for me, whatever I actually need, you know what I need, you'll provide it anyway. I don't even have to worry about that. He comes through in spades. Krishna takes care of us big time. And there's no lack on the other side. So thank you. All right. Anything else?
Yeah, I love when you were talking about and defining karma yoga, you asked the big question of how can my work be connection? How can my work be connection?
How can my work be connection?
Yeah, and how that applies to like everything that we do, because our work is whatever our service is. And then you were talking about how we are asked to use and purify our preferences in order to advance and transcend, right? And so it's not like we have to deny our gifts or our skills or our passions, but how to use them as a way to purify and as a way to connect.
Absolutely.
And help other people connect.
Yeah. And this is, I would say from my experience in sharing this philosophy, this is like maybe the most rich area that brings up questions, because pretty much everyone in the room who's thoughtful, and everyone here and there in this virtual room is very thoughtful. They're immediately thinking, okay, how does this apply to me in my life? How can I spiritualize my relationship with my partner, my work? My boss has been yelling at me all week. What do I do about that? How do I spiritualize that? There's like a bunch of very specific situations that come up for everyone. And the questions are there of how to spiritualize that. So I'm just going to like name it and say, that's totally normal. Good that you're asking those questions. And Krishna recognizes the practicality and the personal application of this principle enough that he devotes a whole other chapter to it too. The 5th chapter is also about karma yoga. He returns to it. It's so important. And for more, I will come into like specific examples like you did with food, but for more individual personal examples, you can, if you feel comfortable, on the WhatsApp or one-on-one in person or one-on-one on WhatsApp, or with your spiritual guides and mentors, with Kelly, if you have a relationship, or myself or others, reveal like, I'm going through this. And so what does this mean for me? And that's like very important, because yeah, we're not actually like fighting with a bow and arrow exactly, literally, metaphorically we are, but what that situation exactly is and how to navigate it will require some guidance. So.
And like what Kira was saying earlier about like when you decide to fight, right, you have, there's like a sacrifice of self in some ways, right? And so I think that until you also do that inner inquiry, like how do I spiritualize all these parts of my life so that I am equipped to better handle whatever comes on the battlefield.
Yeah.
And then to better help other people.
The first sacrifice is the sacrifice of asking those questions. And then the second sacrifice is to hear in a mood of not necessarily blind following, but respectful, careful listening to spiritual wisdom. And
I
then
think it's that sacrifice of, I loved, I forgot your name, Justin, what you said about that, of like stepping into your life purpose, right? If we use that language, which is
Your dharma.
in here, your dharma, right? You're stepping into that and accepting that, which sometimes can be difficult. Even if you like, for me, like I'm a social worker, I know that I'm here to heal and myself and others, but then there was a next step that I wasn't quite ready to receive, and then it was a battle. I had to receive it. But I think that sacrifice is also like stepping into your power, into that dharma, into that like, this is the purpose of me. Like I chose to come here, and I chose to come during this time, so like there's nothing else to do except to accept it.
yeah. And
Keep coming back.
And one of the universal experiences of somebody who's stepping into devotional service and karma yoga, acting in service, is that they experience becoming more powerful. They experience that their agency increases. They can't control everything in the world, but with what is within their realm, what is within their sphere of duty, they become more empowered to do something about, because they do it in a mode of service. They're approaching it in a mode of service. So that descending capacity comes. Like I always loved reading, and I never understood anything as well as I understood Bhagavad Gita, because I approached it in a mode of service to my gurus, and they blessed me with this information, this ability to talk about it and so forth, or you could talk to like Kelly or Justin with their experience, or Mal with their experiences of like kirtan, what is it like to like start doing kirtan and realizing you're getting empowered in doing that. So you can become empowered in your service. And that's a very encouraging thing to experience. All right. I think that's good. And thank you all. So we'll call it a night, and we'll continue the churning the nectar on WhatsApp. I will send out the link to this video link on YouTube in the WhatsApp thread, and if everyone can come up in the next 48 hours with a reflection of something that stood out or what they're going to take away, then it'll get the ball rolling for that in the thread. And of course, questions are always welcome. Jai, thank you so much. So Bhagavad Gita ki jai, all the assembled devotees ki jai. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Thank
Hare
you.
Krishna. Thank you everyone for contingent. So we'll pick up at text 31 next week.